I flew from Jamaica to my daughter's wedding and they seated me behind the kitchen trash cans. You wonder if I say that for taste, for drama. I wish it were only a dark joke. I wish I could tell you I am the sort of woman who takes insults like rain, who shrugs and goes back to the sea. But I am soft and stubborn both. Soft because I was made soft by love and by the long bruises of time. Stubborn because I have teeth that remember how to bite when the heart is pushed too far. Do you know the strange, small humiliation of watching your child sign you into exile on a day meant to celebrate her choosing? Do you know how a mother's suitcase, packed with her best dress and a mason jar of coins saved for years, can feel heavier than the Atlantic when the hand that lifts it pulls away? I will not gild this beginning. I will show you the first scene plainly because the plainest wound bleeds truest. The wedding reception at my daughter's new estate. Marble, pillars, the shallow laughter of wealthy people who have not yet learned humility. And me, my pearls in a little velvet cloth, my chipped mug tucked into the luggage like a talisman, led past the orchestra and into the kitchen where, in a corridor behind stainless steel bins and the smell of frying oil, a folding chair had been placed for me. Behind the garbage cans, they set my chair where no one would see me without looking. Behind the garbage cans, as if I were refuse, as if the years of making a life for her could be compacted into banana peels and used napkins. Why did I come? Because I had promised my own heart, years earlier, that I would be there. Because a mother's promises have their own stubborn gravity. Because I had traveled from Kingston with a bottle of rum and a mason jar filled with coins kissed by the palms of my hands, the last of my savings meant for emergencies and, secretly, for the evening, I would slip a small gift into my daughter's hand. I had sewn my pride into the hem of my dress. I had carried my dignity like a necklace, strung with old pearls that had survived many winters. I remember the flight, June 10th. I think, the day the sky over the Caribbean was the deep blue of an old hymn. I sat by the window and watched clouds like islands pass me, and I rehearsed the conversation I would have. Nothing large, nothing accusing, only the small questions a mother asks when she wants to find out where her child's life rests. At 3:15 p.m. I landed. At 4:20 p.m., I took a taxi to the estate. At 5:40 p.m., the invitation card, folded like an accusation, sat at the valet's desk with a name I had loved twice as much as myself. My daughter, Alina, who once, as a child, used to braid my hair and call me Little Mama, now wore the name of a new life like a coronet. She had married money and ease and people who clinked their glasses and measured life in renovations. She had not married cruelty. Cruelty was not necessary. It arrived dressed as indifference, a slow and fashionable thing. Do not mistake me. Alina was not born a villain. She was raised like I raised her, with hands that were not always gentle, but with a heart that could still be turned. Yet when people cross thresholds of wealth, I have seen their faces change as if someone had pressed an invisible button. They become carpenters who can nail doors shut without remembering where the light comes from. In the house, there were things that should have told me. Small instruments singing the truth. A locked drawer in her study with a brass key that must have been purchased for the secrecy it promised. A chipped saucer in the kitchen that matched the mug I had carried for 30 years. A photograph on the mantel where once I had been standing beside her, now cropped like a mistake. And letters, just one hinted at it. Thin envelopes that Alina kept under a silver tray, which made me imagine a locked box somewhere. A small, dark conspiracy of signatures. The mason jar in my suitcase rattled when I walked. It sounded like the coins in my wrist when I pray. The pearls felt cool at my throat. "Sit here, Mama," she said with a smile as if she were offering me a Christmas cracker. "We have a quieter place for our older guests." Her voice, rehearsed for social pleasantries, was coat-thin. She led me away from the round tables, past the chandeliers that spilled like waterfalls, down a hallway that smelled of lemon tiles and a manicurist's perfume. I thought she had found a private room, a place where she would tell me about the dress, about the flowers, about how the day felt. I thought she would take my hand like she used to and say, "I am so glad you came." Instead, she opened a narrow door, and there, behind the hum of refrigeration and the clatter of pans, was a folding chair and the trash cans. The staff, who wore sympathy as if it were a uniform, bowed their heads slightly, the way churches bow to saints they do not know. I sat, and the chair felt like an accusation. I set my chipped mug on the floor beside me, and I took out the pearls because old habits make armor. I did not cry at first. Crying was a private weather. I had learned to keep my skies clear in public. I watched through the small pass to the kitchen as my daughter laughed at jokes I didn't know and placed a hand on the groom's arm as if to attach herself to his steadiness. Men you marry for comfort will buy you respite from your past. Men you marry for choice make you a project of purchase. I could see Alina's hands move like a woman collecting a census of her successes. You must understand that my life before all this glitter was neither a tale of wretchedness nor a pamphlet of complaint. I had a small house by the sea in Kingston, a garden where hibiscus grew like flaming hearts, and neighbors who swam by like family. I had made sacrifices, many, the kind that go uncelebrated. Nights spent wrapping hand-me-downs in newspaper so my child would not know the weight of poverty. Jars of coins left on windowsills as offerings to future trouble. My durable use of a chipped mug whose rim was worn by the warmth of a long life. I had given up a lot for her. Sleep, youth, the right to spend freely. And I had done it without regret, because to make a child is to carve a small promise into the air and then hope it becomes a shelter. This I confess with neither boasting nor pity. I loved her enough to starve sometimes so that her school fees could be paid. Yet there were signs, tender and poisonous, that the shelter I had built was not meant to be entered forever. I had watched girls at her school grow into women who called me auntie in a tone that placed me beside them rather than above them. I had seen invitations come and go with my name blanked on guest lists. I had a phrase, too, that haunted me, the house of one's own, as if property could cage the past and a title could rewrite memory. It is funny how the things you save, a mason jar of coins, a promise, a letter folded twice, become the tiny levers on which futures swing. A woman at the reception, who I had once babysat for, found me behind the bins and placed her hand over mine. "They told me to sit here, too," she whispered, as if there were a conspiracy of older souls. I smiled and squeezed back. Human touch is a small rebellion. Later, when a server offered me a plate through the swinging door and I reached for it like a hungry child, I felt the bread of my dignity rise and then flatten under the boot of shame. The plate was full of things I had made for her life. Buttered rolls, a slice of roast, the same kind of sweet plantain I used to fry on my little stove. It was as if they had preserved my work and reduced me to an observer of it. If you have ever been turned into an exhibit, you know the way pride stands in the corner, like a statue of wax. I did not meet my daughter's eyes that evening. How could I? To look at her was to open a wound that time pretended to have healed. Instead, I listened. I listened for the words that would save me or condemn me. There were toasts, practiced, perfumed, the kind of speeches that taste like wedding cake and say nothing. And then, in between laughter and music, I heard a name drop like a stone in a pond. "The property will pass to Alina and her husband," said a lawyer-like man, his voice smooth as a new coin. I remember the sound of that sentence as if it were a bell tolling in a midnight chapel. My jar of coins felt suddenly like a child's offering at the foot of a throne. They spoke of legalities, the last will, estate trust, a durable power of attorney, phrases that were foreign and then, unnervingly, familiar because I had once been the one to sign papers. To sign the practical paperwork of a life that had not much to distribute but had a soul to bequeath. I had a letter somewhere, perhaps in a locked box in my own home, a small piece of paper where I had written once, "If anything happens to me, see that Alina has the house. She must never lack." It was an old, tender instruction written when the world was simple, and love untouched by calculation. But in that glittering hall, those words felt brittle, like twigs in a storm. They spoke of revocation and amendment, as if someone had unstitched the seam of my intentions. I remember the micro-rituals, the way Alina arranged her napkin to show the stone on her finger, The way the groom's parents nodded as if affirming a contract rather than a bond. And then, when the music rose, one of the caterers, a young girl with a face like a confession, slipped me a folded note through the crack of the kitchen door. On it, in hurried handwriting, were 2 words: meeting. 3:30 p.m. No date, no name. Only the code that in the language of servants meant business. I folded the note into the palm of my hand and felt my heart begin a cadence it had not known since I had waited for my child to be born. I thought of the locked drawer again and of the letters beneath the silver tray. I thought of lawyers who use gentle words to hide cruelty. I thought of names that can be added and names that can be erased. I thought, too, of the durable promise I had made with that chipped mug and mason jar, that I would not allow my dignity to be flung like refuse in a stranger's kitchen. I had a stubbornness that was not pettiness. It was the last thread of a tapestry I had woven with my life. To lose that thread would be to erase the pattern entirely. I will tell you something very plain and perhaps too honest. The first time I considered taking action, it was small. I thought to simply stand and walk to the head table and take my place, to place my hand on Alina's sleeve and say, "Child, I am here." It seemed to me the simplest, most human thing. But when I rose, a server, young, frightened, respectful, stepped in front of me and murmured that the seating was planned for the comfort of the guests. She did not know she had become an agent of exile. My hand paused midair, and the pearls around my neck felt like a noose and a rosary at once. I sat back down and pretended to adjust the chipped mug. We are sometimes made patient by humiliation, and sometimes patience becomes a plan. I asked the server about the groom's family and their charities, and she told me of donations and trustees, and a name I had heard before in the whispered corridors: the Harrow Trust. Trusts are like curtains. They conceal and define a history. My mason jar rattled quietly in my lap like a metronome. I tucked the pearls into my palm and felt them, round and familiar, like memories stored in some secret chest. I will leave you with a small, sharp image to carry into the night, the way the band played a slow waltz and the couple glided across the marble, and how my daughter's eyes slid past me as if I were a shadow there to catch the light she did not want. And as they danced, a woman in a slim suit, a lawyer I had seen speaking to Alina earlier, her voice as pale and precise as a scalpel, turned in my direction for the first time and, with a flicker of recognition, placed an envelope on a nearby shelf out of sight. Her hands were steady. Her movement was practiced. I watched the envelope disappear like a small, dark thought. I never expected what I found in that drawer. Moral aside, there are thieves who steal with hands and thieves who steal with silence. Both take what cannot be replaced, and both must one day account for the weight of what they have taken. I rose to follow the woman. I followed the woman. The corridor smelled of lemon oil and a faint bouquet. Someone had left to make the air forget the truth. My shoes made a thin, embarrassed sound on the polished stone. I had no plan except the one that had been gnawing at me since the band played and the lawyer slipped that envelope out of sight. Curiosity dressed in old courage. The kitchen door was ajar. Through it I could see the glint of stainless and the flash of a white coat. The woman in the slim suit moved with the calm of someone who knows where all the chess pieces will fall. I kept a hand on the chipped mug in my bag, the ceramic sun-warmed and familiar, like a small country of myself. She opened a second door, a private office. I thought, and the light there was thin and conspiratorial, like a secret kept between two people who have learned how to lower their voices. I had been certain that shame would keep me back, that embarrassment would chain my feet. But there is a peculiar fuel that comes when you suspect a life is being rewoven without your consent. Indignation. I stepped through. There was a desk as wide as my old kitchen table, papers arranged in neat accusation, a brass nameplate, and a wall of diplomas that stared like judges. On the desk lay an envelope, the same one I'd seen tucked away earlier. The woman, Ms. Langford or some such name that smelled of law offices and polished shoes, turned and did not appear surprised. Surprise, these people save for noses that need oiling. They use composure like a fine suit. "You shouldn't be here," she said, voice thin and unruffled. It was a sentence meant to tuck danger away? I shouldn't? I echoed. I felt the pearls at my throat cool like rain. Perhaps. But what was in the envelope? She hesitated as if the question were a dagger she'd been trying to polish. Documents, she said finally, that are private and legal. Legality is a cloak under which greed often hides. I knew the taste of such cloaks. I had once signed a trade in smallness so my child might have largeness. I am the one named in those papers, I said. Show them. Her face made a small, practiced grief. Mrs. Lorraine, this is a sensitive matter. The documents include a durable power of attorney dated June 8, 2025, and an amendment to the last will and testament dated June 10, 2025. They are purportedly executed by you. Her words were careful, as if she were stepping around a live wire, purportedly. A word like that sharpens you. A clock somewhere in the office murmured, "The sound of time in a lawyer's room is a metronome for quiet crimes." The envelope lay between us like a sleeping animal. I reached forward, and for a moment her hand hovered over mine as if to restrain me. I am small, yes. My hair is white. My hands have the tremor that comes from years of stirring pots and wiping counters. But hands that have pressed dough also know how to press a point. She let me take the envelope. Inside, the papers smelled faintly of new ink and of someone's ambition. I read the top sheet. It said, in precise legalese, that the last will and testament of Lorraine Marlowe, dated originally 12/4/2010, had been amended by a codicil executed on June 10, 2025, revoking the earlier clause that bequeathed the family home and a small trust to my daughter Alina, and instead leaving the house and a cash sum of about $230,000 to the newly formed Harrow Trust. There was a durable power of attorney dated June 8, 2025, appointing Alina as attorney-in-fact with broad powers over my real property and bank accounts. The signatures looked confident, the notary stamps official. An addendum outlined transfers to an LLC in Alina's husband's name scheduled for June 11, 2025. My throat dried. The mason jar in my bag felt suddenly heavier than all the suitcases I had carried across the sea. I read the dates again, June 8th, June 10th, June 11th, a choreography too purposeful to be coincidence. I thought of the envelope slipping into the shelf at the reception, of the lawyer's steady hands, of Alina's laugh as she spun. The pattern was clear as a map drawn in the night. I looked up at Ms. Langford. She met my eyes, and for the first time there was a flicker, faint, almost apologetic, but still there. Mrs. Marlowe, these documents were prepared because your daughter expressed concern about managing finances should anything happen to you. She asked us to prepare a power of attorney for your protection. It's common these days. Families like to be prepared. Prepared. The word dryly mowed the grass of my calm. Prepared by whom? I asked. Ms. Alina Hayworth. She signed authorization forms. There is a notarized application here. I held the paper like a match that could set a house aflame. On the signature line, my own name, my signature, was written as if by a hand that knew it well. But the flourish was wrong. The loop in the L did not end the way I had been taught. I had signed my name 1,000 times when I opened accounts, when I registered children for school, when I marked vital things to make small lives possible. I could tell a forgery the way a baker can tell the feel of bread that has been mistreated. You forged my name, I said, and it was not a question. It landed. The room did not make a sound except for the clock's small insistence. She smiled, and the smile was an attempt at gentleness that looked like a lie. Mrs. Marlowe, the notary is here. You are welcome to challenge any irregularity through the courts, but you must understand. I did not wait for the danger to be explained. I think then I surprised even myself. My legs moved as if they had been given back a youth I had long since resigned. I left the office and descended a service staircase that smelled of bleach and stories. The staff corridor was quieter than the gala. I stopped at the small room where the caterers keep their phone chargers and packages. A young woman named Sari was there, folding napkins. She looked up and almost laughed when she saw me. Then her face fell. Mrs. Marlowe? She said, as if testing a name she had learned from the rumor mill. Are you? Are you okay? I told her briefly that there were papers and signatures and a date, and that I needed someone to help me get copies. She swallowed and nodded. Young people, I learned, can have brave faces. They often have fewer inherited fears. She slipped her phone from her pocket and, with an ease that betrays a life lived under different lights, offered it to me to use as a recorder. If you want to say anything, I can record, she whispered. Or I can come with you. I said what I had said for years to those I trusted. Stay close. Then I set the phone down and walked back to the office. I heard the click of a phone recording. The lawyer's assistant, a pale man with a name badge that read Elliot, was alone at the reception desk, his attention on a screen that showed curves and numbers. He smiled politely when I approached, the way a man smiles before deciding if he will be a hero or a convenience. Can I help you? He said. I need copies of the documents you prepared for June, I said. Photocopies. All of them, he blinked. I'm sorry, ma'am. Those are private files. I am named in those documents, I said. You will make copies, he considered. There was a moment when conscience weighs the cost and finds it light. He fetched the folder and returned with it like a man carrying a confession. Inside, it was more than the amended will and the power of attorney. There were bank transfer instructions, signed checks, a printout showing a transfer of $230,000 from an account in my name to an escrow dated June 11, 2025, and a typed memo from a service that handles trust formations to the effect that Harrow Trust had been created on June 9, 2025, with Alina as beneficiary and Alina's husband as trustee. The documents were precise. The numbers were clinical. The printer in the office hummed like a machine that makes decisions. I watched the copies come out and I thought of all the nights I had folded small bills into the mason jar, of the plantains I had fried, of the school books I had hidden under my bed. The $230,000 was a sum that in my life could have bought a home and a small comfort for the rest of my days. It could have been the difference between fear and sleep. To see it scheduled to leave my name was a pain I cannot find the language for. Grief in such a situation is not loud. It is ledgered. I took pictures with my phone, because in the age of images, the truth sometimes needs a photograph to prove its existence. Then, as if fate were a director who insists on drama, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Alina. Hello, Mama, she said like a bell ringing faintly in the distance. She sounded breezy, the way people sound when they have rehearsed civility. How are you? Are you comfortable? I kept my voice steady. Alina, I said, who signed those papers? Who would you sign me away? Her laugh was small and practiced. Mama, there is nothing to sign away. It's all procedure. The Harrow Trust is to make sure your estate is managed efficiently. You wouldn't want your savings poorly handled. Whose savings? I asked. The $230,000 scheduled for transfer from my account? Her voice grew faintly annoyed. Mama, let's not have this conversation here. I'm busy. You are busy stealing, I said. And there was a coldness that surprised me even as it came. My mouth tasted like copper with the word. I have copies of the documents. A pause. Then, measured, the voice I had borne for 29 years, the voice that had called me Little Mama when she was 7, came through with a clarity I had not expected. Mama, you are confusing things. The durable power of attorney is for your protection. If anything happens, we can move assets to ensure a seamless care plan. If anything happens? I repeated. Like what? A glass falling? A bout of flu-like symptoms? Or if I simply live longer than you planned? Silence. The line hummed. I could hear the faint murmur of party music in the background and the scraping of chairs. Alina spoke, slower, a voice that belonged in rooms with windows closed. We signed the documents because it makes good sense. We love you, Mama, you know we do. Trust me on this. Trust? The word was a stone I placed gently on the table. Trust is earned, not drafted in a lawyer's office. Did you have my signature forged? There was a sound like someone picking glass with fingernails. Mama, stop, she said sharply. This is Stop? I repeated. The word would be lodged in her mouth like a bone. No, I will not be stopped. Not now, the line went dead. Her call ended with a cut. I looked up. The lawyer was watching me with an expression I had never seen on a professional's face, a mix of pity and calculation. "Mrs. Marlowe," she said, "you should seek counsel." "And you?" I asked. "Are you counsel for the family or counsel for theft?" Her eyes narrowed. "You are making accusations." "I am making observations," I replied. "Who notarized those documents?" She hesitated, then gave a name. "Notary Public, Gerald Vale. Date, June 10th, 2025. Gerald Vale. I knew the name. He had notarized documents at the municipal center for years. He was the sort of man who keeps a ledger like a Bible. I felt a small flame of hope. If a notary is involved, there is a trace of legality that can be traced. I had action in me now, not the plaintive, uncertain action of someone whose sole weapon is hope, but a practical stepping forward. I left the office and found Sari waiting in the corridor, eyes wide and helpful. We drove in a borrowed car to the municipal records office. The sun sat like a coin in the sky. It was about 11:15 a.m. The woman at the counter, Miss Carter, looked over her glasses at me as if I were a crossword clue she had seen before. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I need to see the notarization records for a Mr. Gerald Vale on June 10th, 2025, I said. "Also, any deeds or transfers for property at 14 Westwood Lane, Kingston," she typed, fingers swift. "Those are public records," she said. "But you'll need identification." I gave my ID. She led me to a room where files are kept like sleeping animals. The record for Gerald Vale's notarizations that day was printed. There it was, a certificate with a signature, a stamp. But attached to it was a form from the bank showing that on June 11th, 2025, $230,000 left an account in my name and was directed to Harrow Trust Escrow. The bank's stamp was clear. The transfer reference code matched the memos from the law office. The proof was a web, each thread connected. I felt something like vertigo. The small, private indignation that had burned earlier had become a scandal in miniature. I had the dates, the notary name, the transfer amount, the trust formation minutes. The law had drawn a line and walked across it. The ledger told the story, but I had not yet seen the hardest proof, the voice, the confession. If they could be shown on paper to have conspired, perhaps they could not be shown to have admitted it. I wanted a voice. To my luck or fate, when I returned to the reception area at the estate, the office phone, one that had been answered by a sleepy assistant, was unattended. It lay on the desk like a ringing thing that someone had forgotten to answer. I picked up the phone and, with the small cunning of someone who has learned household tricks by force, I pressed a little red button labeled Record. The device clicked. I had with me pictures, copies, dates, and now, if luck favored me, a voice. I dialed Alina's number. She answered on the second ring. "Mama!" "Alina," I said, and I kept my voice small so I would not sound triumphant. "I am at the law office. I have paperwork. I have the transfers. Tell me, when did you decide to rewrite my life?" There was a pause long enough for a prayer. Then I heard faintly Alina's hushed voice, not meant for me but for someone at her side, saying clearly, "Make sure Mama thinks everything is legitimate. The durable power of attorney must look like it was for her benefit. The Harrow Trust will take the house, and the $230,000 moves to escrow on June 11th. If she learns too soon, she'll cause trouble." It was a small, terrible confession, shaped like cold metal. I pressed the ear of the receiver to my chest to feel my heart there. The voice continued, and I recorded every word. "You mean you forged her signature?" a man's voice asked. Alina's voice was level, ruthless. "We had help. We paid for a notary and a lawyer. It was necessary." I felt the floor shift. That phrase, "we had help," opened a door into which I could throw light. I had proof now, paperwork, a recorded confession, bank records. The ledger had teeth. This was not a problem for private shame. It was a case for the law. I thought of my small house by the sea, of the mason jar waiting for emergencies, of the pearls in my hand. I thought of every night I had sat mending her clothes and thinking, softly, that a mother's work can be as noble as any temple, They had tried to remove not just my material means, but the testimony of my life, as if to say I had never been. Dumas once wrote that the most terrible prisons are those made of the refusal to speak. I had been held in a silent cell so long I had almost forgotten the key. Now I had the key. Moral aside, when men conspire with paper and coin, they reckon without the stubbornness of memory. Paper burns, but the old heart remembers. I left the estate and, with copies and recordings and a small band of allies, sorry the server, Miss Carter at the municipal office who had given me the printouts, and an old friend from church who knew a lawyer named Emmanuel Santos, we sat at a small cafe and planned. Emmanuel, who had once performed weddings and compiled wills for modest families, listened like a man who measures risk by the weight of truth and not by the thickness of bank accounts. "You have documents and you have a recorded confession," he said. "The notary was involved. That will make things clear. We can file for an emergency injunction to stop any transfers and seek an immediate restraining order." His face was gentle and as resolved as a preacher. He plucked a paper napkin and wrote a phone number on it. "On June 13, 2025, he said, we will need to file the claim. But right now, we have the evidence to freeze accounts. The bank will not like to lose its own money." I felt a flicker of triumph, a dawning sense that the tide might turn. It is funny. When you are used to being the giver, the holder of small mercies, you do not immediately imagine yourself as an adversary. But once the instrument of theft is in your hand, the proof, resistance becomes not only possible but necessary. We worked through the night. I recorded statements. We made copies. We prepared to move on June 13th. My heart was a drummer that did not tire, but there are always other hands on the board. On the morning we were to go to court, a letter arrived at my small guest room, a crisp envelope that slotted under the door like a sword. I opened it with a flutter of old hands. Inside was a single page, a temporary restraining order signed by a judge, issued at the request of Alina Hayworth, alleging elder misconduct and accusing me of attempting to unlawfully remove legal documents from counsel's office. The tone was clinical and precise. It read, "Due to allegations of potential asset misappropriation, Ms. Lorraine Marlowe is restrained from interfering with legal files pending a full hearing." I read it twice. My breath made small puffs like a kettle. They had turned the law to their defense as quickly as a soldier spins a shield. The court had its own bureaucracy for betrayal. They had anticipated me. They had preempted my move with a court order that cast me as the aggressor. The world of law is quick with paper when the right pockets are lined. My evidence, our plan, seemed suddenly not enough. But the voice on my phone was still there, Alina's whisper that had confessed, and the bank printout still had its stamp. I was a woman armed with song and ledger, and I would not be quieted. I made a decision then that made the world change shape. There are moments in life when small elders become actors with iron in their marrow. This was one. I would not surrender to paper that bound me like an old debt. I would not be the passive ant in a picture cropped to exclude me. I would not take exile behind trash cans. The law might be a fortress, but the truth, when gathered and wielded like a blade, can topple walls. I called Emmanuel and told him we would not wait for the next morning. "We go tonight," I said. "We go tonight to the bank. We serve the injunction at the bank, and we put a hold on the $230,000. We go to the notary and demand records. We do not give them a chance to breathe." He was dismayed and, for a moment, practical, the kind of man who knows that courts have hours and fierce forms. "It's risky," he said. "They could have security waiting. The only thing that risk means to those who have nothing left to lose is a new kind of courage." "We risk," I said. "We fight." And so we made our way to the bank, a place of marble and reluctant clerks, with a small clutch of papers, and a woman who still had a signature on file that could be compared to the one on the forged instruments. There we demanded an emergency freeze against the transfer. The manager, a polished man whose tie matched the ruling class, listened to Emmanuel and then to me. He called upstairs and left the room. "Mrs. Marlowe," he said eventually, "we have a court order." I felt my stomach fall into my shoes. Then let the court decide who is telling the truth, I said. But in the meantime, hold the funds. He hesitated. There are legal procedures. Do it now, I said. Call the Harrow Trust and tell them no transfers will be completed. I have a recording of a confession. This time, the manager did not speak with the cool assurance of someone who stands between money and its owners. He walked to his phone and made the call. There followed quiet minutes in which we all listened to the breathing of the bank. Then, just as Emmanuel leaned over me and whispered that this was the first step, the door opened and a man in a dark suit walked in with a woman at his side, Ms. Langford from the estate. And behind her, Alina. She did not look like a woman who had come to court. She looked like a daughter attending a family emergency. Her eyes found me, steady and cold. There was a small room in the bank, and the manager stepped between us like a referee. He spoke softly, and Alina's voice was the same one that had told me to trust her. "Mama," she said, as if that one word could soften stone. "We can settle this privately." Alina stood in the doorway like a verdict. Emmanuel's jaw hardened. "We will go to the court," he said. "But there is a temporary restraining order in effect. That compels us to move through official channels. We have the confession. We will file a motion to vacate the TRO." Alina smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Why go to court when we can avoid scandal? I can make things right." Her right hand, the same hand that had placed my chair behind the bins, rested lightly on the manager's arm. For a moment, the bank seemed poised between two worlds, the one where wealth buys silence and the one where truth is stubborn. I looked at Alina and saw not the child who had braided hair, but a woman who had become a builder of walls. I reached into my bag and felt the pearls like cold prayer beads. The mason jar of coins I had brought as a relic of my thrift seemed like a joke in the face of $230,000, but the pearls were mine. I had done the small things that age turns into dignity. I felt them slip through my fingers like an invocation. "Make no deal," Emmanuel said softly. "Not without the court. Not without the judge." Alina's face shifted then, as if a veil had been pulled. She drew closer, and with the confidence of someone who believes power will protect them, she said, "You cannot stop what we have already set in motion, Mama. The transfers are planned for later tonight. The will is executed. You are making a spectacle." Her voice hardened into a declaration. She turned to the manager and the lawyer, and in a breath she presented a small packet of papers, a court order countering ours, signed by a different judge, alleging that the recording was illegally obtained and that any handling of the documents by unauthorized persons could be construed as tampering with legal materials. The bank manager paled and opened his hands like a man who waits for orders. This was the last blow before the turning. They had spun the machinery of legality into a shield and pressed it up like armor around the puppet they had created. The papers were crisp and smelled of printers. The power of institution, of judges, of stamps, of countersigned orders, is enormous. It moves like tidewater. I was a small boat. Yet even small boats can be steered toward rocks. I looked at Alina, and, for a second, I saw the child who had climbed my knees and learned the names of birds from my mouth. Anger and sorrow collided inside me and formed something hard. I made my choice. Moral aside, when a child becomes a stranger by way of documents, the bonds of blood are tested. Law may bend, but memory endures as an unbowed witness. I turned to Emmanuel. "File to vacate that counter order," I said. "We will not be driven out by ink. And prepare the motion to subpoena the notary's original journal. We will ask for the signature exemplars from my old documents. We will call witnesses. Tonight we move." As we gathered our things and prepared to leave, Alina's husband stepped forward. He smiled a smile that was built of confidence and impeccable tailoring. "Mama," he said, "this is messy. For everyone's sake, let us resolve this quietly." I looked at him. He had the look of a man who believed wealth could purchase pardon. I remembered the smell of the frying oil behind the bins, the whispers in the hall, the envelope slipped into the shelf. I had the recording, the bank records, the notary's name. They had the court orders. Outside, the sky had gone silver. I felt my resolve harden like cooling iron. The battle had been joined, and there was no retreat. The night waited with its own plans. The days after the bank were a study in small mercies and sharper tensions. We had the recording, the bank printouts, the notary's name, and a temporary restraining order filed by Alina that cast me as the aggressor. They had tried to make me the thief. I thought with a grandmother's blunt honesty that the law must be like a room with many doors. Some open to daylight when you have friends, and some are bolted from the inside by those who dress themselves in new clothes at the expense of old promises. We set the hearing for June 13, 2025. At 09:30 a.m., Emmanuel called it a preliminary injunction hearing, the sort of phrase lawyers say to make simple human frailties sound like weather reports. We arrived early. The courthouse smelled like dust and coffee and the solemnity of people who have come to have their lives rearranged by sheets of paper. The clerk stamped our filings. Motion to vacate the counter order. Petition to subpoena notary Gerald Vale's journal. Petition for emergency freeze on Harrow Trust escrow accounts. And a request for admission of the recorded phone call. The judge, a woman whose hair was done as if in respect to the law itself, listened with a patience that felt almost like kindness. Alina entered with the groom at her side. The roof of the courtroom felt lower than the high-ceilinged hall of her wedding. The chandeliers of her life had been swapped for fluorescent fluorescence. She wore the same smile as before, but there was strain in it now, like a ribbon stretched to its limit. Ms. Langford sat at the counsel table with a face that could have been washed in bleach and dried smooth. She looked like a legal sculpture. Alina's husband, the trustee on paper, kept his hands folded as if he were praying for an outcome measured by numbers. I sat at a small table with Emmanuel and the papers like a stack of faithful birds. Sorry, bless her quick and luminous heart, sat across from me, holding a small recorder in her palm. Miss Carter from the Municipal Records Office sat near us with her printouts. There were other small witnesses, the server who had slipped me the first stray note, a neighbor who had seen me arrive on June 10th, and a woman from church who had come with sandwiches and a stare of moral clarity. The judge opened the hearing at 09:45 a.m. and, after a brief roll call, asked to hear why we believed the counter order should be vacated. Emmanuel rose like a man who carries his truth not like a weapon but like a telegram. He spoke of dates, June 8, 2025 for the durable power of attorney, June 9, 2025 for the formation of Harrow Trust, June 10, 2025 for the allegedly amended last will, June 11, 2025 for the bank transfer of about $230,000 scheduled to move out of accounts in my name. He described the motion that had been filed at the bank, the footprints of the transfers, and the recorded statement in which Alina had discussed the plan. The judge's eyes narrowed when I presented the recording. The law in paper and ink is often rhetorical, but the human voice carries its own force. She listened as we played the recording where Alina's voice, cool and assured, said, "Make sure Mama thinks everything is legitimate. The durable power of attorney must look like it was for her benefit. The Harrow Trust will take the house, and the $230,000 moves to escrow on June 11th. If she learns too soon, she'll cause trouble." The courtroom was small and the sound seemed to make the air between people thinner. The voice echoed in the room. Ms. Langford objected, fierce and neat. She said the recording was illegally obtained and thus inadmissible. "Your Honor," she said, "we should not be guided by surreptitious devices." She was, in that moment, the high priestess of procedure. Emmanuel answered with a calmness that had the steadiness of someone who had counted on storms. He argued that in the jurisdiction where the call had been recorded, which, for the clarity of the court, we told them was the same city where the hearing was held, one-party consent is lawful, and the recording was therefore valid. He also pointed out that we had other corroborating documents, the notary's journal entry, the bank transfer memo, and the Harrow Trust formation papers dated June 9, 2025. The judge took a moment, then told the court she would take the matter under advisement but, given the apparent risk of irreparable harm, she would issue a temporary injunction to freeze the escrow account and place a constructive hold on the property transfer until a full hearing could be conducted. It was a small victory, but it was vital. The $230,000 would not leave my name on June 11th, while the law considered the shape of truth. She also ordered the notary, Gerald Vale, to produce his original journal for examination. I remember that small, glorious relief. The bank manager exhaled as if his shoulders had been carrying a secret weight, and Sari squeezed my hand. There was the taste of cedar and victory in my mouth, like the memory of the first sweet plantain I taught my daughter to fry. But this was only the beginning. Paper can be forged, voices can be muffled, and people with ambition will always find new rooms in which to hide. We had a subpoena to serve. I will tell you plainly, serving a subpoena is not heroic. It is an act of domestic necessity. We drove to Gerald Vale's office at 11 a.m. The man sat behind a desk with a calendar that had seen better years, and pens arranged like an altar. When he saw us, his face did something I had almost forgotten. It went as pale as a piece of cloth in the sun. "Mrs. Marlowe?" he said, and for a moment his voice shook. He did not deny the entry in his book. He only seemed surprised that anyone had paid notice. He produced his journal willingly enough. His handwriting was tidy, the entries dated and stamped. But listed with the notarization for June 10, 2025, next to my name, there was a note that read, "Notarized per affidavit presented." The stamp bore his name and a notary number. Emmanuel and a certified graphologist we had retained, a woman named Dr. Helen Ortiz, examined the signature exemplars. She traced the loop in my L with a glove as if handling a relic. "Mrs. Marlowe, may I see your previous signatures for comparison?" she asked. I supplied older documents, a school registration from 1999, a small deed I had inked in 2005, a bank signature card. Dr. Ortiz compared them, her brow furrowed like a seamstress at a difficult hem. "This is irregular," she murmured. "The ink flow is inconsistent. There are signs of tracing." In lay terms, the signature on the June documents did not match the organic rhythm of my hand. There were tremorless strokes where my hand would have stuttered. There were pen lifts in places my hand had never learned to lift. The hand that signed was practiced, not mine. We presented Dr. Ortiz's preliminary report in court on June 20, 2025, at 10 a.m. The judge read the findings with her steepled fingers and then turned her attention to the bank. The bank produced transaction logs showing that the transfer instructions had been submitted electronically from an IP address belonging to a small consulting firm associated with Alina's husband's business. There were email trails in which a party, under an anonymized address, requested expedited formation of Harrow Trust and attached a scanned, signed power of attorney. The fabric began to look less seamless. The turning point, the true unmaking of their scheme, came from a source I had not expected. Notary Gerald Vale's assistant, a man named Marcus who came forward during depositions. He had been pressured, he said, to notarize documents after business hours. He described a phone call on June 10th at 8:30 p.m. in which Mr. Hayworth, Alina's husband, had said, "We need this done tonight. We can't have any problems in the morning." Marcus admitted he entered the notations after being asked, and he described seeing a scanned copy of a signature printed and presented as original. His eyes were tired when he spoke. He looked like a man who had been waking in the night to the sound of his own conscience. "Mr. Hayworth called me at 8 p.m., Marcus said in court at 2:15 p.m. He said the documents had to be finished. He told me a courier would bring the originals. I was told to stamp what was presented. A courier? The word opened a new seam. The judge ordered the courier logs. They were found to be flimsy, but there was a delivery receipt signed in a hurried hand and a GPS log putting a delivery van in Alina's area that evening. The web tightened. The judge's expression became like a hammer. The courier's log had a scrawl. As the evidence accumulated, the recorded confession, the bank's trace, the notary inconsistencies, Marcus's testimony, the facade began to crack. Ms. Langford's defenses grew thin. She argued that her actions had been guided by client instructions. She had acted on borrowed facts. The judge, however, reminded counsel that lawyers hold a duty to the court and to the vulnerable. She called for an inquiry into Ms. Langford's conduct and suggested sanctions if it was found she had aided in the fabrication. On June 25, 2025, the judge made a decisive ruling. The counter order was vacated. The injunction remained to protect the assets until a final hearing, and she referred the matter to the Criminal Division for potential charges of forgery and elder financial abuse. The judge's words were measured but unmistakable. "The law will not be used as a tool for erasure," she said. The judge also ordered immediate restitution. The ledger entries would be reversed. The $230,000 would be returned to my accounts pending final disposition, and the Harrow Trust's formation would be placed under a forensic audit. I felt the world shift like a ship finding harbor. It is strange to be both small and large in a single moment, small by age, large by the weight of what you have endured. The pearl at my throat felt warm. It had the pulse of something alive. But the legal victory, while vital, is not the same as poetic justice. Law gives orders. Life distributes shame differently. The next act of retribution came in the public square, the square of society and rumor. Word had spread because people love stories of the fall of the proud. The video of a grandmother who had been seated behind the bins, in which Sari had captured the moment the server slipped the folded note to me at the wedding, was shared. The recorded confession was leaked, not by us but by an underpaid clerk with a heart. Social media, which can be cruel and also righteous, took up my narrative. There were comments and shares and hashtags that flashed like fireflies. Mama behind the bins, for Harrow scandal. People who had once been guests at the wedding now found themselves murmuring in shops and online. The world that had turned its face in pride was now forced to look. Alina's phone did not ring as it once had. Invitations that once arrived as if by command ceased. Her husband's business partners called to say they were reviewing matters. Ms. Langford's firm issued measured statements about client, confidentiality, and ongoing matters. A lingua franca meant to sway the impartial. Yet there was a toll. Reputations take years to build and seconds to unmake. The wedding photos were now evidence. On July 3, 2025, a magistrate determined that probable cause existed for criminal charges. The police knocked on a very unfamiliar door, the kind of door that once opened to champagne and congratulations. The officers served warrants. The news cameras that had arrived earlier for social pageantry now hovered for a different scene. Alina was escorted from her townhouse with a face that had once been arranged for ballrooms and now tasted of defeat. People who saw her in the street did not avoid her out of ignorance. They avoided her because the world had become a mirror she could not bear. There was a hearing on July 20, 2025. The charges listed were clear: forging a durable power of attorney, forgery of a last will and testament, attempted elder financial exploitation, and aiding and abetting. The bank reversed the $230,000 transfer that week and reimbursed my accounts. Ms. Langford was subject to an inquiry by the Bar Association. Gerald Vale was suspended pending investigation for his role in notarizing suspect documents. Marcus, the assistant, who had once been frightened into silence, now sat with his head lifted like a man who had found a crooked stone and turned it over. But the sweetest justice, and Dumas would smile at this, was not only the legal reversal, but the social accounting. At the fullness of the court's decisions and the glare of the public eye, Alina's marriage, which had been as much a transaction of reputation as of affection, frayed. The groom had been persuaded by lawyers and accountants he trusted that volatility could be managed, but the stain of public scandal is stubborn. He distanced himself. Public humiliation cut deeper than the loss of funds. He who is married by convenience has a marriage built on foundations that crumble when truth arrives like rain. Yet I am no creature of revenge for revenge's sake. I watched the unmaking and felt, behind the triumph, something complex. I had loved a child enough to risk all, and I had been betrayed. I had an opportunity to crush or to teach. What is the use of victory if it breeds emptiness? The Count of Monte Cristo, who I read with a hungry admiration in my youth, found that revenge can shape a man until he no longer recognizes himself. I did not want to become a stranger in triumph. Before the final confrontations, I said to myself and to those who sat with me, if vengeance is a mirror, let it reflect the truth and not merely the ugliness of my wound. The judge's declarations were fine, but I wanted something else, a restoration of dignity. I wanted Alina to see what she had attempted to hide, not merely to be removed from her place of privilege. I wanted to be seen. Moral aside, justice without compassion is law dressed in iron. I sought the iron to be softened by truth, so that neither of us would be unmade by the ordeal. The arraignment was public. The prosecution rested on the paperwork, the recording, the notary's journal, the courier logs, and the testimony of witnesses who had seen pieces fall into place. The defense attempted to minimize, to frame the acts as misunderstandings and administrative haste. But the warmth of a mother's work is not an administrative detail. The judge, who by then had become accustomed to seeing those who believed themselves untouchable, rendered a sentence that balanced law and mercy. There was restitution ordered, the Harrow Trust was dissolved as formed under suspicious circumstances, the $230,000 returned in full, with legal costs assessed to the accused, a suspension of Ms. Langford from practice while the bar reviewed her conduct, and criminal prosecution was referred in the matter of the forged documents. Gerald Vale faced administrative penalty and further inquiry. Alina was ordered to perform community service for an elder advocacy group and to make public apology statements. The court required that she attend counseling and financial ethics classes. For some, the punishment might seem light. For others, it was an awakening. I chose, privately and with the dignity that had been my companion for so many years, to accept the legal result and to seek a reconciliation that would not forget, but would not remain cruel. I insisted that part of the restitution be used to create a small fund for elderly women who were victims of financial abuse. It felt right to turn what had been taken into a safety net for others. When the legal dust settled, I returned to my modest house by the sea. The hibiscus bowed like old friends, and the ocean breathed the same salt air it had always known. People came by with casseroles and apologies. Some came with the bluntness of shame, others with the softness of regret. The mason jar sat on my kitchen shelf again, though now it was a different jar. Friends and neighbors had filled it, not with coins for a single emergency, but with an offering toward the fund for elders I had insisted be created. Alina came to my house once, 2 months after the judgments. She stood on my porch with her hands folded. I saw then a woman who had aged in ways money cannot heal. She looked smaller, not merely in stature but in dimension. Her voice was fragile, stripped of performance. "Mama," she said, and I saw a child in it. Her apology was uneven, and it took time for the full confession to unfurl. She spoke of pressure, of greed that had been normalized, of a fear of scarcity that made her grasp what she thought was a means to security. She said, "I am sorry," in a way that suggested remorse and not merely regret. What I did then is what I had always wanted in my heart. I let her speak, and then I decided. A mother's justice is complicated. I chose not to press the full measure of the law beyond what the court had ordered. Instead, I insisted on truth, public and private. She had to speak at the fund's first meeting and to recount, honestly, the sequence of events. She had to return to the community and bear the weight of what she had done. I was stern because love without firmness becomes a weapon used against the self. We repaired our relationship as one might mend an old sail, with care, measurement, and the understanding that sometimes the roar of the ocean leaves permanent scars. She worked at the Elder Advocacy Group, listened to stories of those whose names had never been in court, and fed them the soup that once fed her. There was a humility there I had not seen in her before. It did not erase the past, but it allowed for movement, for redemption to begin. Poetic justice, in the end, was not a hammer to crush but a bell to ring. Alina lost the social position she had thought permanent. Her husband, who had been quick to protect his assets, retreated from the partnership and faced his own professional consequences as clients reconsidered. Ms. Langford's reputation suffered. She was disciplined and lost clientele. The notary faced suspension and the shame that comes with a public inquiry. The money returned to my name, and with it I made choices that were deliberate and kind. I repaired my little house. I established the elder fund I had demanded, and I took a small trip back to the sea where mornings are blue and simple. In quiet hours, I would sit at my kitchen table with the chipped mug and the pearls and think of the lessons. Betrayal had come in the code of legality. Courage had come in the form of a phone recording and the determination of small people who chose to be brave. If there is a moral that Dumas would applaud, the sort of lesson he wrote with his aristocratic pen, it is this. Men and women who think to erase the past by ink will find that memory writes back in louder voice. A forged signature may pass a notary's glance, but it cannot silence the voice of what was done to a life. I think now of the day at the wedding when they seated me behind the trash cans. I have kept that image not as a wound to be bled over, but as an engine of direction. I have turned indignity into activism. The fund, called the Mason Jar Trust because of the jar I carried, helps elders secure legal counsel and educates families about the rights of older people. We have helped 5 women reclaim homes and pensions. We have stopped 2 suspicious transfers. We meet on the second Tuesday of each month at the community hall, and sometimes I speak. People listen. There is a sweetness to that. My daughter and I do not pretend the river between us is shallow. Some betrayals cut deep and leave stones that have to be walked around. But I have found, to my astonishment, that truth can be medicine and that mercy can be chosen without forgetting. I did not seek only to punish. I sought to heal and to ensure that another grandmother would not be seated where I was. If this story touched you, if it made something in your chest stir, then share it with someone you think needs courage today. Tell this to a neighbor, to your own children, to the person you worry about. Sign up to learn about elder rights. Help a small fund if you can. And if you would like to hear more of these stories, the ones that some people tuck away and pretend never happened, subscribe to the channel. This old heart has more truths yet to tell, and I will tell them with my chipped mug in hand. The sea still remembers my name.